Hi everyone, my name is Sarah Beth, and I just finished reading Under the Dome by Stephen King. This book was published in 2009 and is about 1,100 pages long. So, funny story about this book. This was actually an idea that Stephen King had ricocheting around his head in the 70s and lost the manuscript for, and then basically had 75 pages and stopped because he couldn't really get through all the technicalities of this novel and didn't really have the understanding to do so. So he used his friend Russ, who was a medical assistant, to do a lot of the research for this novel, which he started back up in 2007 and finished in, of course, 2009. So I've read Stephen King's works before. This is not my first foray, and I would say I genuinely enjoyed this. I think this is definitely one of his best. I think that it's probably for me in the ranking system under Misery, which is another Stephen King work I thoroughly enjoyed. I will say it's definitely a long haul. If you like The Stand, I would say this is really reminiscent of that book, especially with its apocalypse kind of setting. And I just think that it's almost heartwarming in the way that this small town has been trapped under a supernatural dome. Spoilers, though not really spoilers, the reveal will be a little bit disappointing, or at least it was for me. So, main premise of the novel, a small town in Maine, because Stephen King makes every single setting of his novel in Maine. They become trapped under this dome one day, and the first few chapters are really just people dying because of the dome coming down. You see a whole bunch of car crashes, people's limbs getting chopped off, pacemakers exploding, all that jazz. Which I think is a little bit tedious. There are certain parts in the novel which, because it's 1,100 pages, feel a little bit extra, not exactly needed, though I do believe it kind of paints a picture of what has happened in the novel, but maybe should have left out all of the. There's so many car crashes. So many car crashes from both sides of the dome. And very quickly, you are just introduced to a slew of characters. It's a very large cast, but I feel like it's done well enough to where I was able to know every single character. I knew their defining traits. Even if I couldn't remember their name off the top of my head, I knew the main players and how they related to one another. There was never really any confusion for me. There's a few sections where I felt it wasn't really needed or that character wasn't my favorite, but as a whole, I loved the main players and I loved most of the secondary characters. I think the whole problem with Stephen King's characters is they are always one-dimensional. He is a storyteller. Stephen King is a fantastic storyteller at that. But at the end of the day, there is no character arc that you will see in this novel. It very much reads like a really good sci-fi with some gore involved. There's enough gore that I don't think younger readers should read this book. There's also some sexually explicit scenes that are might induce some triggers, so please check your triggers if you're going to read this novel. But on a whole, it doesn't really take up too much of the novel if it is something that you are sensitive to or prone to. I think that you probably will be okay, but no kid should read this. That's all I'm going to say. I think the strength of the novel comes with our antagonist, who is Big Rennie. He's essentially the selectman of the town's second selectman. He has a figurehead up top, and he is pulling all of the strings, and I love how much thought goes into how he's going to take control of the situation, how he almost enjoys the power that it's giving him. We have our protagonist who is extremely boring. I'm sorry, he's not a fun character to follow. His name's Barbary. He was a lieutenant in the army, Lieutenant Barbara, and he has come to the small town after his military career, and everyone calls him Barbie, and he's been having some trouble with the locals. And because it's such a small town environment, they view him as an outsider. So when this dome comes down, certain people, like Rennie and his son Junior, who is also a very despicable person, they very much want to do away with Barbie, while he does have enough support in the town to create his own camp. The whole book is really about the political scene inside the dome and its message of global warming, because the dome is doming in all of those harsh chemicals and the gases that we produce daily with our inherently violent actions. I do believe that just the interplay between these two parties, the sects of the corrupt politicians and our do-good army veteran Barbie, it's very much interesting to see how his camp adds to itself and how Big Greenie is able to basically take up followers, because as a character, it's always more fun to deal with the villains. It's always nice to see what made them a villain and how they are inherently bad sometimes. I love how they don't try to change Big Greenie as a character. He is just a terrible guy, and you get to learn more about his character. There's really no redemption in him. Yes, he's a God-fearing man, but I'm not going to say this is a spoiler because it's not really that big, but he definitely kills the pastor. So, just things like that do happen in this novel. There is murder, there is mayhem, but it's Stephen King. Would you not expect murder and mayhem from Stephen King? I really enjoyed this. The prose is fine. Once again, Stephen King, not known for his prose, but he's so good at telling a story. And I love that despite the length, this is not a slow novel. It is gas all the way, and it only takes place over the span of a week, which I thought was... I love how in-depth it is, because it's almost inventive how much detail and gas happens within the span of a week, which I think it's so well done. I love the fact that Stephen King came back to this concept because only he could have done it justice like this. Though somebody did point this out to me while I was reading Under the Dome. They said, "Oh, didn't The Simpsons have a similar theme?" And I realized that they did. And I know that Stephen, after reading his author's note, I know he didn't take inspiration from that. But at the same time, maybe he did a little bit, because it was an environmentally friendly message for the Simpsons movie that came out before this book came out. Anywho, there is actually a show that CW did for the show in 2013 to 2015. I have not seen the show as of yet, so I cannot make commentary on how closely related the show is to the book, but I think this is actually, it reads like a show. I think if you read this almost as if you were binging or different segments like you would watch a TV show weekly or every few days, I think it really lends well to this book. I read this book slightly slower than I would have if I read it by myself, but I was reading it with somebody else, almost in a book club fashion. And I recommend that because I think you can still keep most of the book ingrained in your head and want to know what's next. So this is actually a really high recommendation from me. I personally enjoyed it a lot, and I hope you enjoyed my review, and have a good one.